Wow, good morning. Man, it's so good to be able to serve the Gideons once again. I think the last time I did this was about 7 or 8 years ago, but I've been serving the Gideons for almost 15 years sharing this testimony. And it's been an honor and a privilege to do so. My story starts with a tattoo artist, a Vietnam veteran, and a Gideon, a bold Gideon with a Bible in his hand. In 1998, I was released from jail after committing a burglary. I turned to crime that fueled my drug addiction, and it was in 1998 that I decided to give up crime and give up drugs. It was in 2001 that I decided to go get a tattoo. And so I never met this tattoo artist, so I went to his shop on a Friday, and I asked him how much for the piece that I wanted to get. Tattoo Kelly is his name. He says, well, I don't know, it's kind of a big piece, and we'll just charge you by the hour, and I'll charge you $100 an hour, and we'll just keep track of the time. And I said, that's fine. And so we scheduled an appointment for the next morning, and he began my tattoo that Saturday. So he's doing my tattoo, and he's getting it all going, and as I'm getting my tattoo, I notice that people are coming into his shop. And they're obviously friends, and because they're calling him by name, and they're like, Kelly, hey, what's up, bro? Like, hey, how much for this tattoo? And Kelly would respond by saying, I don't know, bro. How about $50 an hour? It's kind of a big piece, and we'll just keep track of the time. And I'm like, okay, well, this guy must be a really good friend of his, and so he's giving the bro deal, right? And so I thought, okay, and so we're just sitting there, and I'm not too curious yet until the next person comes in with the same question. Tattoo Kelly, how much for this tattoo? And he says, I don't know, it's kind of big, $50 an hour, we'll keep track of the time. And the third person and the fourth person with the same explanation. So curiosity got the cat, right? And so I asked Kelly, I said, who are these people? And he goes, oh man, these are people from my church. You should come check it out. And I'm thinking, well, maybe I should. Man, get good deals on tattoos. The next morning, I showed up to Tattoo Kelly's church with the intention to befriend Kelly and to get good deals on tattoos, no other motive at all. So here I am at the church. It was an Easter Sunday, and I'm guessing it was a Resurrection Sunday message. I don't know, because I didn't listen to a thing. I just wanted to get close to this man. I arrived at this church, and it was this small little biker church, and I was greeted by this little pastor. He looked like a cross between Willie Nelson and George Carlin. And he grabbed me up and gave me one of those weird Christian hugs. You know what that is? And I'm just like, they're just long and extended. And I'm like, hey, dude, get off, you know, like. But if this is all that it's going to take, okay, I can handle a Christian hug. People they were obviously super friendly, and it was really neat. We experienced these people. They were very nice to us, and I simply thought, and this is honest truth, I thought, man, if this is what it's going to take to get close to Kelly, to get good deals on tattoo, this is going to be the easiest hustle I've ever done in my life. So we went week after week. We ended up joining a Thursday night Bible study, and soon after, Tattoo Kelly asked me, he says, hey man, you want to be part of our motorcycle ministry? And I thought, man, this is getting better by the moment. Good deals on tattoos, and now I can become a biker? This is great. Man, I've never rode a bike in my life, but it sounds really exciting. So I agreed that, yeah, this would be something fun to do. And so Kelly said, okay, well, there's some rules that comes with that. You're going to be assigned an older brother, and that older brother is meant to disciple you. And he's going to show you the ropes. And so they assigned me a Vietnam veteran named Gunner. Now, this guy, if you didn't know him, if you looked at him on the streets, you'd think that he would probably kill you if you crossed him. But he is the sweetest man, let me tell you. Gunner told me, he says, well, what you need to do first is you need to get a biker vest, you need to get a notepad, a pen, and a pocket Bible, and you need to have those items in your biker vest at all times. And I said, okay, and I just set out to achieve those goals. This is what I'm going to do. So I got my biker vest, and I got my notepad and my pen, but you know, I lived in the high desert, and there was 2 Bible bookstores, and I couldn't find a pocket Bible for the life of me. I did go to I actually entered into a Bible bookstore for the first time in my life, and I asked them, I said, hey, do you have a pocket Bible? And they go, yeah, we normally do, but we're out right now. And I said, well, when can you get them? And we don't know. Now, you got to understand the context of this church. It was a little biker church, and these rules. And I was listening to some of the servants in the biker ministry, and they would say, listen, if you don't have the things, the items in your vest, and your older brother that is assigned to you calls you out and you don't have those things, they're going to discipline you. And I'm like, discipline me? What are you talking about? Oh, they'll make you pull weeds around the church, or the dreaded parking lot duty in the North 40. Now, mind you, I was too prideful to be called out on that. You see, what we would do in the mornings when we would arrive at church is that all the bikers would circle up. And there was about 20 or 30 of us there at any given time. And the older brothers would call upon the younger brothers in the morning, and they'd say, hey, pull out your Bibles and read from John chapter whatever. And I would just get there every Sunday and I'd say, no, don't call on me. Because the minute that he calls me out and I don't have this Bible, I'm going to be humiliated in front of a bunch of men. And this is not going to be good. It will not end good. And so I would go week after week and I would circle up, and Gunnar never called me out. But it was about the 6th or 7th week that I was there, and I'm stressed out already, even before going to church, and I just know that this is going to be the week that he's going to call me out and ask me to read from my Bible. Thankfully, he didn't, and we got through church, and I made a beeline for the car, and for the first time ever, I cried to the sky. I didn't even know what I was doing. But I said, God, if you're real, give me this Bible. There is no tattoo worth it. And I'm ashamed to admit that I said, man up and give me a Bible. Right, probably not good advice. I got into the car, and Sheila got our boys in the car, and we didn't have custody of my son, Michael, at the time, and so we were taking him home to his mom. Well, Sheila, my beautiful bride, she promised these boys John's Incredible Pizza. Now, if you know what this is, if you're not familiar with what this is Chuck E. Cheese on crack, right? And so I'm already frustrated. I didn't want to be there, so I'm trying to convince Sheila all the way from church to John's Incredible Pizza. Let's just go and get them cheeseburgers and take them home, and let's go home. And she wins because she's mom. We pull into the John's Incredible Pizza, and it takes about 20 minutes from the church to John's Incredible Pizza to get there, and we pull in, and I'm frustrated, and because I didn't win my argument with Sheila, and so I open my door, and I fling it open, and I was just frankly being a jerk. My door's wide open, and I open up my son's door, and I'm trying to get him out of his car. Meanwhile, I still see it today, a brown Honda Accord pulls up, and he can't get out of his car because my doors are open. And I remember his window is down, and I said, hey, listen, man, as soon as I get my son out of this car seat, I'll close my door and get you out. And here's what his words is, and I could hear it as clear as day. He says, it's Sunday. I'm in no hurry. I'm like, okay, whatever that means, right? And so I finally wrestled my son out of his car seat, and I closed the doors. And I'm waiting for Sheila to get her son out of the car seat, and I get a tap on my shoulder, and I turned around and I said, what? And here stood this 5'0", 70-year-old man, and he pushes this Bible in my face, and he says, the Father tells me to give this to you. Yeah. "15 years later, I still get choked up. I grabbed that man, and he was just this little guy, and I'm not. and so I'm like holding him, and I'm thanking him, and his little legs are flipping around. And I let him go. And I didn't know what was going on. I pride myself in being a man's man, and I've never cried. I haven't cried in a long time, and I was crying that day. I didn't understand why. That man got back in his car. His wife was in the passenger seat, and she never got out. I'm sure that, 70-year-olds like pizza and beer, but maybe not. I'm certain now that what I know from the Gideons, that man was a Gideon, obviously. His wife was an auxiliary member. And I'm confident that as her husband turned left into a parking lot that he had no earthly business being in, that he was on a mission for God. She stayed in the car, and I'm convinced that she was praying for her husband as he approached this giant of a man. Tattoos from neck to toe. This man had no fear of man or me or the moment. He was sensitive enough to hear the Spirit of God and turn left into a parking lot that he didn't even belong into because God told him, the Father said, give this man a Bible. I dared to pray a second prayer. I said, God, if you would allow me to be sensitive enough to hear you like that man heard you, to take lefts into parking lots that I have no earthly business being into, please, God, let me do that. Since then, in 2009, I commissioned as a pastor, and I worked part-time bivocational as a pastor, and in 2012, I quit a very lucrative job to take on a not very lucrative job at the church, and in faith. It was one of those left turns that made no earthly sense. I remember my dad saying, son, what are you doing? You can't quit your job. I'm like, no, God's calling me to this church. In 2014, another left turn. God called me to Encounter Christian Church in Bellflower, California. It was a replant of, a dying church that was planted in 1935 around dairy farms in Bellflower. Very white and affluent church for a very long time, and God was faithful to bless that church all the way up until it began to just a slow death. And that's when I came in, and God called me to help revitalize that church. I've been leading that church for 7 years, and it's doing well by God's grace. Yeah, amen. We identified that prior to my coming, that their missional strategy was to have more babies. As their neighborhoods and the influence and affluence were changing. And so learning to love your neighbor was a new concept for this church. But by God's grace, we're learning to do that well. This all started with a tattoo artist, a Vietnam vet, and a Gideon bold enough to face anybody on this earth. Sensitive enough to hear the Spirit of God. Today, I'm on sabbatical actually this summer. I've celebrated 7 years as their pastor. I've authored several books. If you want to hear the long story, or you want to read the long story of my testimony, because it's so much longer than 10 minutes and 3 seconds, you Gideons are like on time. I love it. The book's called Thanks for Asking, and we would love for you. That book is actually going into thousands of that testimony of a Gideon and his faithfulness is going into thousands of jails and meeting thousands of prisoners right now. And so I encourage you to grab that. And I have the copies, man. If you guys just come to me, I'll just give you one. Because I just want to bless you guys and encourage you to continue to do what you do by passing out these testaments, being sensitive enough to the Spirit to know when God says, take a left, go this way. Many of you are called to go overseas, and you're hesitant about whether to go or not. Go. God's calling you. Maybe God is calling you to just stop what you're doing right now, and maybe retirement is where you're at, but maybe it's the next step that you just need to say, hey, I'm taking this step for the Gideons. I'm going to dedicate more of my time and more of my money and more of my resources so that more people can get God's word in their hands. You know, in 1998, I was convicted for burglary. that was an attempt to fuel my very long addiction to methamphetamines. And today I live by the verse that is in this Bible. The Apostle Paul says, "Let the thief no longer steal, but let him labor hard with his hands so that he may be generous to anybody who's in need." Thank you, Gideons. Thank you, Auxiliary. I love you, and I'm indebted to you. I never saw that Gideon again, but if you can identify, I've got like he wore khakis and a blue blazer and a button-up shirt, and he had white hair. So if you see him, please tell him to come talk to me. Thank you, guys. I love you. Appreciate it. Keep giving them out.